Hello, everyone, and welcome to Since 1919. Today, I am joined by Zach, who you may know from one of our most popular episodes, Tales from the Punch List. If you haven't listened to that yet, please do so. It's posted on Spotify, YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and then we also post weekly to YouTube Shorts if you want to see clips from the podcast. But today, we're going to be talking about construction assisted design.
Yep.
Specifically, we're going to follow some things about design build, construction manager at risk, and then kind of see how that compares to a more traditional method of the design bid build. But Zach here has a lot of experience working specifically with design build, so we're going to do a little more emphasis on that today. But Zach, if you could kind of take us through what is a traditional method of working, just to start so people know.
Yeah, I think it's important just to kind of understand what like a traditional design delivery approach is, and then take that and compare it to what design build is. So,
move your mic a little closer. There you go.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right. So, like a typical delivery is called design bid build. So that's when basically, if you're an owner and you want to design a building, you reach out to an architect and you basically say, hey, I got this project that I want to work on. This is what I want to do. And then from there, the architect will design the building per the specs that the owner gives them. And then once we're 100% done with our drawings, we'll send it out to a number of contractors, general contractors. They put a bid on it, and there's a bid opening. You typically are going to choose the lowest bid, and that's the contractor that's going to be selected for the project. So there's three distinct sort of, I don't know if you necessarily want to call them, there's kind of a stigma. I'm going to use the word stigma a lot today, but associated with saying silos, but there's really three different components. There's an architect, there's an owner, and then there's a contractor. But for the most part, they're three separate entities. So that's design bid build. So design build is a little different because the contractor and the architect, they're under one contract. So really the owner, the advantage for them is they have one single source entity that they reach out to that's in charge of designing and building the project. And then the third one we're going to touch on a little bit today. So what I like to call it is contractor assisted design. Mm-hmm. So basically, design build falls under that category. Basically, what that's saying is that you're getting the contractor involved during design so that they can be a part of the team earlier. And we'll get into the details a little bit later, but in my opinion, it's just that collaboration is just super effective. So the second approach to contractor assisted design, so there's design build, and the other one is construction manager at risk. So really it's very similar to design build as far as the contractor. In this case, we're going to call them the construction manager. They're involved during design, but they're a separate contractual entity. So they're the construction manager, and then you have the architect, and then you have the owner. But the construction manager is selected during design so that they can give, we'll talk about advantages later, but they can be a part of the team basically, and there's better collaboration.
Right. And then I know I asked you this during our pre-interview, but typically, how does a design build get started? Do they reach out to you? Do they reach out
Sure.
to the construction company? How does that work?
So, in my experience, a lot of my experience is what I'm gonna be sharing. I'm not saying this is the only way you could do it, but in my experience, a lot of times the contractor comes to me and says, "Hey, I got a client that they want to do this building. They reached out to me to do it, and obviously they need to have an architect on their team to design it, right?" So depending on the construction company, some of them that I work with have in-house design teams, so they can come up with like preliminary designs and whatnot and themselves, and then they can present that to me. Other ones don't have that capability, so they would rely on me to do that. But it just depends. The architect can be, a lot of times if it's a design build project, and the owner knows they want to do that, they know they want to do a design build project, they'll reach out to the contractor first. But if they're talking to me and and I feel like it's a good fit for a design build project, so typically I look at two things. One is budget and the other one is schedule. Nice. If those two things are super critical on the project, then I'll typically, I mean, I know they're always critical.
Yeah.
Like money and timing, it's always critical to have those two things straightened out.
Yeah.
But if they like will lose profits or they'll lose out on certain aspects of their company and how they function if they don't open on time, or if they have a very strict budget where they cannot go over a certain amount of money, and it's obviously everyone's only got so much money to spend. But if it's super strict, then I typically will refer them to a design build. And I could, there's a number of contractors that I work with that I could suggest for those projects depending on the size and complexity of it. But in those situations, I would suggest then to the owner maybe a design build approach, and then that's when they contact me first, and that's kind of how that would work out.
Okay. And I know we'll cover this later, but I know it also depends on like the entity you're working with, like a school, a housing authority. Sometimes they have rules about what kind of approach you can take, but we'll cover that a little bit later. Do you want to start doing some pros and cons?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. Again, this is my experience, okay?
Yes.
So other people may have different experiences, but this is just based on what I see. So So pros and cons of each one. So I'm going to talk about the three ones that I mentioned earlier. So we have design, bid, build, which is the traditional approach. Design, build, which is one of the contractor-assisted design approaches. And then the other one is construction manager at risk, which is very similar to design, build, but there's a couple of key differences that I'm just going to touch on that. So the first one is the traditional approach, which is design, bid, build. Some pros of that. Okay, let's just get into this first. I'm pro design build, so I'm gonna scratch and claw at some pros of design bid build. Yeah. We could do anything honestly, but I just, again, with my experience, some of the pros is that you could call it a pro. Is that the owner has more freedom, I guess, in their initial design, right? So like typically it allows the architect to, I don't know, I guess you could say be more creative. And because we're not getting like, that's again why I don't know if it's 100% a pro, because you're not getting checked on your design by the contractor as you're doing it. So from time to time you might get a little crazy and things might get out of hand. You're just trying to do something beautiful and just listening to what the owner says. But typically, yeah, I mean, you have a little bit more freedom maybe in your design. And the other one is competitive bidding. So that's generally why people like design, bid, build the most, is because of the competitive bidding. I'll get into that a little bit later, because I also think that there's that's not 100% accurate, that you're not getting that with design build. But that's one of the reasons why most clients are going to want to lean towards that, is because you get that competitive bidding. Unfortunately, those are the only two real pros I can think of.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so the cons, in my opinion, you're relying on the architect's cost estimates. So I'm not going to, again, this is my experience. There could be some firms that have really dialed in cost estimating, that maybe have staff dedicated to that. The use of third-party cost estimating is more prevalent now, I feel like, and that can be more accurate. But ultimately, when architects do cost estimating, I guess the best tools that we have in our toolbox is recent projects that are similar size and scope. A lot of that, though, is going to be like a cost per square foot. So it's very broad. It's not, every project's different, right? So it's not like a true apples to apples comparison. So if you were able to find another project that you did, it's got to be recent, because if it was a couple of years ago, I know there's some inflation that you can add to that. But for it to be really an accurate cost estimate, it would have to be a recent project that you're finding of similar size and scope, that you could do $1 per square foot. Unfortunately, though, I've just been involved with too many projects that that we're relying on architects' cost estimates, or however the architect comes up with their cost estimates. We're relying on that to stay within the owner's budget, right? Because every project, I know I talked about it earlier, but every project, the budget's important.
Yes.
The owner only has so much money to spend on it. I've been involved in too many projects where we relied on the architect's cost estimates, and then we bid the project out, and it's like it could be right on. Usually it's not, though. Usually it's over.
Yeah, just in my involvement, sometimes I'll see like the bids coming in for projects, and sometimes there's quite an array of like, this seems on target, this is way above, this is way below. There's a lot of variation.
Especially since COVID, I really feel like it's been more like volatile, I guess you could say. Just the different variations of costs from one project to the next. And it's just, unfortunately, it sometimes is just not dialed into the point where we get all these bids from the contractors, and let's just say it's 20% over what we originally thought, right? That's, the architect, we got egg on our face now, and you got to stop, because it's not like if it's 20%, 30% over budget, the owner can't just move forward with it, right, typically, unless they have access to those funds. A lot of times they don't. So what has to happen is typically you'll work together with a low bidder on what can we cut out of the design, whether it's scope, the size, the quality, or the materials. You got to cut stuff out to get it back on track, and that takes time. So typically that's just going to slow the project down. And it's just going to make everything. You're starting off on a bad note. Usually the owner's mad.
Sure.
Your cost estimates sucked. The architect's mad because they got to, you got egg on your face, and then you're trying to work this project back to be on budget. And, the contractor, really, they're just doing their best. They were just involved once you finish the drawings on the project. So they're just telling you what they find out. This is the cost, and we got to cut it down. So, but typically that's not, nobody wants to slow the project down. And then the other really big con, in my opinion, with that is it just is inherently set up to be an adversarial relationship between the architect and the contractor, because for the contractor to get the project, they had to competitively bid it per the architect's drawings and specs.
Yes.
So for them to get the project, they have to have the lowest price. For them to have the lowest price, they can only bid what they see on the drawings. It's really difficult for them to try to say, well, this is what it looks like on the drawings, but in real life, we're probably going to have to do additional stuff to give this finished product, what we need it to look like, So they're not going to just add money in their bid for that stuff. They could ask the question. I appreciate that, like pre-bid meetings and stuff where they could say, hey, you didn't show this. What should we do here?
Yeah.
And we could clarify it in an addendum. But typically they're trying to get their lowest price possible. So during construction, when things pop up, they're not very willing to just say, hey, we'll just eat the price for that. And there's going to be change orders. And there's a lot of times when the architect kind of takes that personally, and they're like, hey, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
My drawings are really good, and you should have known that. So ultimately, it just kind of is set up so that you're button heads the whole time. And, just from my perspective, from a quality of life perspective, it just isn't great. I like to try to balance that, like our mindset, our mental health, and it's just makes everything more stressful, and it just, in my opinion, not ideal. So those are, again, what I feel like the cons generally kind of outweigh the pros for design, bid, build. So next I want to jump into design, build, which is, again, my preferred method. The pros, the owner has a budget from the beginning, and the team is dedicated to meet that budget. So when I'm teammates with the contractor and we're designing this together, they have so much insight on current market pricing and trends for building systems, whether it's HVAC equipment, electrical, actual building envelope, structural systems. They have so much insight on that they can give you that while you're designing it, and you don't have to design the whole thing before they look at it for the first time and tell you shouldn't have done this.
Yeah.
So it really saves a lot of time, in my opinion. To be able to work towards a budget number at the beginning, it really just helps keep everybody on track. Design change orders is a huge one. The owner is hiring one entity to design and build it, right? So from a design perspective, I'm saying any change order. I'm saying design change order. So there's still like unforeseen conditions that could pop up. It's construction. We don't know what, especially existing buildings, we don't know what we're getting into in certain situations. 100%, you could do your due diligence, but there's still going to be things that pop up.
Yeah.
But design change orders, you can't go back to the owner and say, I need more money for this because it wasn't on the drawings.
Yeah.
Like, that's typically not going to fly because the owner's going to say, I hired you to design this and build this. Like, I'm not cool with you guys internally kind of mess that up then. So typically you don't see that. We still try to be as diligent on our drawings as possible, but we're communicating with the contractor the whole time. So if they got questions, they just pick up the phone and call me.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's very seamless, I guess you could say, that the design change orders. Nobody wants change orders. I promise you that. But that's usually mitigated a little bit more in design build. And then, obviously the value engineering I talked about, typically once you're done with drawings, then you take that step where you're taking, it could potentially take months to get it back on track and get it back on budget. So that value engineering stage that you would typically see in design bid build, if it's over budget, you don't have that in design build because you're constantly getting your cost estimates. The construction companies have estimating teams.
Yeah.
It's literally their job is to price buildings, and they're pricing your design as you're designing it. Yes. So you can never get too far out of bounds before they're typically like, hey, you need to check yourself on this, and we need to dial this back a little bit. So, architecture firms typically don't have a cost estimating team dedicated just for that. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's huge. And then ultimately, and we were talking about this as kind of something that popped up that was like, man, this is actually just probably one of the best benefits of it, especially in a time since COVID. And, there's still items that are long lead time items. Yeah. They can kill you on a project sometimes. So in a typical approach, design, bid, build, the contractor, again, they're not involved until the design's done. Yes. So they can't identify long lead time items until the design's done. Right. On a design bid or on a design build project, when you're teammates with the contractor, one of the first things that they do, I'm going to just shout out to one of my main design build partners, Ringland Johnson, because they are great at doing this. Mm-hmm. They identify long lead time items like first thing they do. Yes. And then they will expedite the design for whatever design you need to kind of meet whatever that final product is so they can order it during design. Mm-hmm. It's huge. And it can save so much time on schedule and budget to make sure that you're identifying that stuff sooner. So to be able to identify those things and then order them sooner, months sooner than you would have in the design bid build approach is huge. So those are the pros. And then as we were trying to talk about cons, I'm going to use the word stigma a few times because I think that they're perceived cons, but I think that there's really just kind of a misunderstanding of how this process works. So I mentioned earlier design, bid, build. One of the keys to why people like that is the competitive bidding component. Yeah. Well, in design build, everything is competitively bid on the subcontractor level. So typically most general contractors, they self-perform like maybe up to, I'm just going to throw this number out there because I think it's fairly reasonable, maybe 5%, maybe 10% at the high end of the total contract cost is stuff that they're self-performing. So that means 90 to 95% of the contract is being competitively bid by subcontractors. Right. So typically the general contractors, unless it's something very specific that they need, they're gonna competitively bid everything out at the subcontractor level. So to say that it's not competitively bid is just not true. Mm-hmm. And then the key to that though is being transparent with your costs, where they're all coming from. Mm-hmm. As long as the contractor is being transparent with the owner and showing them where the money is being allocated, it really can help relieve that stress from the owner's end to say, my budget's $1 million, and you're telling me that this project I'm getting is $1 million, but how do I know you're not designing and building a $750,000 building
Yeah.
and just adding a huge markup to it, right? There has to be transparency, and there has to be that trust developed between the design build team and the owner for that to work out properly.
And how would you achieve that? Like, what's an example of that transparency?
So one of the things, if the owner wanted to see that, if they wanted to see the bids from the subcontractors, just to show, hey, I really did bid this out, and I really did give you the lowest bid. A lot of that, on like a pay application, typically there's a schedule of values that shows each trade and what money is allocated to each one.
Okay.
So typically that level of transparency to just physically show them where the money is going is typically sufficient to just give the owner peace of mind that they're getting the product that they're truly paying for.
Yes, which is key.
Yeah. So in most cases, in my opinion, those are kind of the big perceived cons of design build. And then just to kind of touch on, I know, it's not, again, it's contractor assisted design. It's not just design build. There's also construction manager at risk. Really the pros are the same as design build as far as the owner has the construction team and design team together. They're contractually separate entities. That's really the big difference, is that the construction manager and the architect are not contractually teammates. They are separate, but the construction manager is hired at the beginning of design to oversee our design, do cost estimates, provide input on materials, provide input on lead times, stuff like that, so that we can make the best decisions as soon as we can, and that we're not going back and backtracking. So really, it's got a lot of the same advantages. It's just that we're not contractually teammates.
Now, is that kind of an attempt at transparency since you're not on the same contract? So it's kind of like separate you a little bit, would you say? Or can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I want to, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe why an owner would want to take the CM at risk approach as opposed to design build. A lot of times, and in my opinion, again, this is just me kind of trying to provide my best interpretation on this. I think it's probably just because having the architects separate contractually from the contractor gives them the peace of mind that we're not, that I'm in it with the owner.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily tied with the contractor just doing what they tell. We're talking behind the scenes and we're coming up with these different ideas. So I do think that there's this sort of perceived transparency that the owner can get extra from the architect, knowing that they're not contractually, tied to the contractor. So we basically, going back to design build though, as an architect, I'm always looking out for the owner. That's just it's kind of like our duty, I guess, on a project, because we're always the owner's representative. So on a design build project too, just because I'm contractually tied to the contractor doesn't mean that I'm not still going to look out for the owner's best interest, right?
Yeah.
Typically, and we talked about this a little bit, typically if I do see something that's kind of, maybe I'm unsure of, or I think something may be done differently, I'm teammates with the contractor on a design build project. So I'm going to talk to them first before I go back to the owner behind their back and try to say, hey, I think you're getting screwed over or something like that. I'm teammates with the contractor. We're going to talk about this. We're going to be on the same page before we present something to the owner. But again, if it's something that, being an owner's representative on a project, I think maybe just the optics of it are more clearly defined in a construction manager at risk project because we are separate contractually. The cons, again, are kind of the same stigmas that I talked about with design build, as far as there being no competitive bidding because you chose a construction manager at the beginning. That, to me, again, when you got subcontractors that are competitively bidding on it, that's a large amount of the contract that is being competitively bid. And then again, you just need to be transparent with everything. The one con that I can think about with construction manager at risk though is the design change orders. So in design build, when I talked about, you don't typically see that because the owner paid for one party to design and build it. You're not doing that in construction manager at risk. So there could be some things that make their way to the drawings that the architect is pushing for the design that maybe wasn't clearly communicated to the contractor. They see it, during construction, it pops up, and they could ask for more money because the architect screwed something up in that situation. So I do see that as maybe being a con in that perspective. My experience, I mean, typically, again, the construction manager, we're pretty tied together. So hopefully anything that makes it on the drawings they're aware of, or anything that doesn't make it on the drawings they're aware of. But that theoretically, that could be a con in that situation. So yeah, I think for all three, those are the advantages and disadvantages in my experience that I could think of.
Okay. So just wrapping up here. So obviously we know you prefer design build, but is there anything else you want to say that why you specifically really are drawn to this format?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the biggest thing is collaboration. I like when everybody is on the same page and we can work together as teammates. I like to talk about just your quality of life and your mental health when we're talking about projects, because it's so prevalent, how stress is a real thing, and anxiety, and just the pressure of meeting deadlines and all that. So the more seamless you can make that, the better. And just in my experience, I feel like when we're all working together on the same team, you get that better quality of life in general. And I do think that's super important. But, I'd like to think that most owners want everyone to have that too, but they might not care about that. They might just care about their project and making sure that it's getting built correctly and on budget and on time. But it really does, in my opinion too, it just streamlines the whole process. Yes. It really, you're designing it, cost estimating it, ordering materials, potentially those long lead time items. You're done once you're done with the drawings. You've been developing the price the whole time. A lot of times what they call it is a guaranteed maximum price, or a GMP. Yep. That's like the bid that the contractor agrees to with the owner, and that is getting established just shortly after the drawings are done, and then we're ready to go. Yeah. Because the contractor is really in tune with the design and the drawing, so they can get started as soon as they get a permit. They're ready to roll. They already got subcontractors lined up, scheduled to make it. Another thing, I think just giving real world experience from my end kind of helps explain it the best for me. Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about, I know I mentioned Ringland Johnson's a great design build partner of mine. Another one on a project I worked with here in town, Schmaling. I know Colin is probably watching this. I hope he's still watching it. I know we're kind of late in the game, but we did a project with them, design build project. That was honestly probably more of a CM at risk project, because we weren't contractually under the same boat, but it worked like a design build project really because of that communication and whatnot. We are setting records today. I think this is the longest podcast. So I'm going to just backtrack a little bit. So just speaking on this project that we did with Schmaling, again, it was a 2-story addition that we did at the YMCA, and matching our floor-to-floor heights for the existing building was super important because we didn't want ramps and stairs and whatnot to get from one side of the addition to the next. The existing building had used precast concrete floor slab for the second floor structure, which is it's just a super thin structural system in general, because you can take a large span and you can do it with just a solid piece of concrete. So in my opinion, with the floor-to-floor height limitations potentially that we might have, I thought that would be a perfect thing to continue to do on our addition. At the time we did it, though, Schmaling had just done some precast projects, and it was just not in the. We were going to have to wait forever to get precast, and the cost was higher than it typically would be.
You were up against a deadline. They wanted to open.
Yeah, it would just didn't seem feasible to meet the client's deadlines for opening time and meet the budget constraints, schedule, everything. So I was going to just continue to do precast, but then again, they're so much more in tune with these different building types that they suggested, no, we can't do that. We need to do it with the steel structure. And there was some, components that we really needed to dive into, but ultimately we didn't design a precast structure and then find out that we had to do a steel structure.
Right.
We designed it from the beginning to be a steel structure, and just having that collaboration and that having them on our team early enough for them to provide that insight was invaluable. And honestly, it really kind of helped keep the project on track, and it made it super successful. So that's just one example that I can think of, that having them on board as soon as possible was huge.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And so I know this has been a ton of information, but maybe as a summary, design, bid, build. There's a design, and then the construction company comes in after that design has been already pretty much decided on. Design, build, construction manager at risk. They're basically involved from the very beginning.
Yep.
And so obviously we went over the pros and cons, but those are probably like the key differences if you're just giving like a general overview. And we also wanted to mention here at the end something that Zach actually pointed out, is that we mentioned some companies or some entities cannot do design build, but now schools can as of January 2024. So like he mentioned, it helps to streamline the whole process. Even municipalities are kind of included in that now as well. So who knows, maybe one day housing authorities, that could change too. But yeah, is there anything else you want to say in conclusion, Zach?
No, ultimately I just feel like it's the collaboration.
Yeah.
Teamwork makes the dream work. That's the key.
Right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening today to Since 1919, the longest episode we've ever done.
Let's go.
So lock in, listen to the whole thing. Please follow us on all of our socials, and visit our website. We have some of our projects on there if you kind of want to see what kind of work we do. And if you want to stay up to date, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, all of those avenues. Thank you again so much for watching.